Hello and welcome to the Playoff Years, the podcast where we analyze and reminisce our favorite playoff appearances year by year. I am your host, Conor O'Donnell, joined by my brother, Brian. How you doing, Brian?
I'm good.
Yeah, so for our inaugural episode, of course, we're going to reflect on the regular season for the 2017 Chicago Cubs. If all goes well, I would like to do a follow-up episode after the playoffs. I don't know if you would like to be a part of that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully we'll have some good results in the playoffs.
But as for like this podcast, like in general, it would be like a mix of like current season recaps that would be more round table discussions, kind of like this one. The episodes on past years will be more polished with interviews, hopefully. But I'm just gonna see where we go with this. Basically, we're both from Chicago, so more episodes will be focused on Chicago. But I'm hoping to expand this concept to other cities and hopefully collaborate with other like bloggers, other fans from different cities. So that's the ultimate goal for the cast, but we'll see where it goes. But love to chronicle the past two seasons from the Cleveland Indians fan perspective. That's kind of like my next idea as far as going like baseball for like a different city as well. I also don't want to do just baseball. I would like to do other sports as well. So hockey, probably not soccer, but everything else I think is definitely on course for this podcast. But so, of course, we love any feedback on the format of the show. At Conor P. O'Donnell on Twitter for myself, and it's B. O'Donnell14 for you, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Excellent. And for the show, at Playoff Years on Twitter, playoffyears@gmail.com for longer suggestions in email form. So, with all the formalities out of the way, let's do it to it. So, let's talk about the 2017 Chicago Cubs. Disclaimer, we are recording this during the final game of the season. We're actually watching it right now. So some of the season stats will be slightly off, but that's okay. I mean, we're going to be one win off when we talk about the record or what have you. So, and hopefully nobody gets hurt. I think that's the other big thing because we'll talk about our predictions at the end of the season. So you ready to do this?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the Cubs, of course, coming off their first World Series victory in 108 years, as we all know. And we've never been in this situation before, like as a team, as a fan. Like I know, like myself, I wasn't like super jazzed up for this year because like as a Cubs fan, we're always like, yes, new year. The April games are always like really, really cool. Maybe they'll be good this year, but this year is a little different. I was just kind of like relaxed and it's like, all right, kind of, I don't know, I'm not sure what to do with myself. Like, how are you going into the season?
I actually felt exactly the same way, which was weird for me because opening day of baseball is probably one of my favorite days of the year. Yeah, going into this Cubs season, it for whatever reason just did not have that same feeling. It was almost a feeling of, you know, what could really top what we just experienced. It kind of took me a little while to get into this season. I think it took the team itself a little while to get into the season, but I don't know. I think that's just natural after what we saw last year.
And I think what got me was to like I wasn't sure what to expect with this team as well. I mean, I know there's a few like key subtractions and we had some additions as well to the team, but to name off a few, for me, Dexter Fowler leaving the team to sign with the Cardinals, I thought that was the biggest change. Would you agree, or would you say like David Ross or maybe one of the pitchers?
No, I would agree with Fowler. He was such a big part of the offense last year. Yeah, you go, we go. I was a really big Dexter Fowler fan. I loved him at the top of the order. So, but I mean, he got his money, and I'm happy for him. But yeah, I think that was the biggest change for me was Dexter Fowler.
Yeah, as far as like looking at it objectively as like how good the team is, I think we needed Fowler. But as far as like the personal fan of me, I was kind of sad to see Soler traded for Wade Davis. Obviously, we got the much better deal in that trade. A couple notables to John Jay. I knew it was going to be a decent signing because he's been a consistent player pretty much his whole career as his numbers with the team. Chapman, we knew was going to leave. Travis Wood is expected to leave. Jason Hamill also didn't re-sign. I thought he also was a key piece of the 2016 team that didn't really... We kind of forgot about him just because he wasn't on the playoff roster. He pitched really well for the Cubs last year and 2015, and I thought he got a little bit of a short end of the stick. Obviously, I can't remember his numbers in Kansas City, but I thought he was a great person for the team as the fifth starter.
Yeah, that's a good point at the end there. As your fifth starter, you can't really ask for much more than what Jason Hamill gave to the Cubs the past couple years, and even before that when they had him and traded him to Oakland. You know, Travis Wood, Chapman, to me, you know, I didn't see them as being huge losses. I liked Wade Davis coming in. I've always been a big fan of his at the end of a bullpen. With Jason Hamill leaving, you know, that kind of brought up the question who would be the fifth starter for the Cubs. They kind of juggled that a little bit this year. At the beginning of the year, they had what was his name? Brett Anderson, and then
as you brought it up, I'm like
Eddie Butler, and so I mean they kind of held it down, and then Mike Montgomery really stepped up and was a good fifth starter up until the All-Star break when the Cubs got Quintana. But so Jason Hamill was a great fifth starter, but yeah.
I think my biggest fear too was just like how this pitching staff was going to react to, because one, Arrieta contract year, so I mean most people weren't too worried about him, I guess. Last year, another year older. Lackey, assuming this is going to be his last year, or I mean that's the way they're talking about it. So we were kind of like, how is this pitching staff going to do? And Hendricks, like, he had such an unbelievable year last year that I was like, how is this guy going to repeat? I mean, I've always been a huge Hendricks fan, but I'm like, is this guy really like the real deal? And is he going to continue? I mean, I think we were all expecting a little digression, just a little bit. I'm glad he's really bounced back in the second half, obviously. So I was really kind of concerned about how the pitching staff was going to do. The hitting, I was just like, man, they're going to hit. I don't know about you. Did you have the same concerns?
Yeah, I guess the biggest surprise in terms of the hitting was Schwarber struggling so much after what he did in the World Series. But you have to figure Chris Bryant will be the same, if not better. Same with Anthony Rizzo, Addison Russell, hopefully taking a next step. It took him a little while to get going, but here we are at the end of the year, and Rizzo and Bryant are really right back where they were. Javi Baez had a nice year. Contreras was unbelievable. So yeah, I think the pitching staff was more of a question mark than the hitting for me too.
Yeah. So going to the first half of the season, because there's a few storylines going into the season, a few key games that I kind of want to go over as well. So starting off the season, I think the big storyline was Kyle Schwarber is in the leadoff spot. And I'm pretty sure I expressed my dislike for this move early on in the season, because Kyle Schwarber doesn't really seem like a leadoff hitter. People's like, well, you don't really need a typical leadoff hitter. But my feeling has always been the Cubs have usually succeeded as a team when they've had a good prototypical leadoff hitter, whether it's Dexter Fowler or when we had Kenny Lofton in the 03 season. Did you think at the time that was a good idea, having Schwarber as leadoff? I mean, did you hate it as much as I did?
I didn't like it either, but at the same time, the Cubs really didn't have, and they still kind of don't have really that prototypical leadoff hitter. To me, going into the year, I thought maybe Ben Zobrist would have been the best option, but he also was not performing at the beginning of the year. So I didn't like the move. I wonder how much it affected him. He'll never say that it had an effect on him, but I tend to believe that it did. Once they got him out of that leadoff spot, I think we've seen him come back and perform a lot better.
Yeah. So other storylines that I remember starting the season, pitchers gave up a lot of first inning runs. I don't know how many, but there was so many that I don't think we need to look in the exact number, but it was a ridiculous amount compared to I don't remember, it was like the All-Star break or maybe a little bit before that. I know we had like given up more first inning runs than we did like all of last year, which is just shocking to think of. Just it was just happening. It wasn't like that the pitching was like, they weren't good obviously, but it was just weird that we just couldn't get off to a good start ever, whether it was the season or just any of these games really. And it just seemed weird. I think another kind of growing pain early in the season that I think we had not really thought about, or at least from my perception, is, we have Wilson Contreras. He's still a young catcher. We don't have David Ross anymore, but Contreras is the main catcher now. He has to catch guys like Lester, Lackey, some of these veteran guys that expect a lot. I remember a lot that Contreras frequently had to make like visits to the mound. And I think that had a little bit something to do with a kind of a slow start. I mean, you can't blame him totally, but like I think we definitely had some growing pains. I don't know if you agree or not.
I think that's a really good point. Going into this season with David Ross retiring, everyone was making a huge deal out of, John Lester. Oh, he's not going to have his personal catcher. What are they going to do? And at the time when that talk was going on, I kind of downplayed it personally. I didn't think it would be that big of a deal. I mean, even though John Lester and David Ross were amazing together, I really thought that Contreras would be okay and would be able to get that going. But now looking back over the course of the whole year, it's kind of interesting. I mean, John Lester did not have a John Lester type year. I mean, I don't know if that has anything to do with David Ross being gone, or if it's injuries, or just getting older, or what. But I think that is a good point. Maybe that could have been part of the slow start to the season was Contreras trying to get a hold on the pitching staff.
I think a key move this season that I was not anticipating to, because we had Ian Happ called up in the early on in the season. I'm not sure when. I can't remember exactly when it was, but this was a guy that we knew had a lot of potential, swinging the bat, of course. There were talks that we were probably going to be traded him for like a fifth starter or another starter for the year. And so I was like, oh man, that's kind of a shame. We're not going to see Ian Happ in the major leagues. But then when we brought him up kind of as bait, can we really trade this guy? Because he performed so well in the beginning of the season. I mean, obviously his numbers have evened out. He's been pretty consistent, 250 hitter, good power numbers, good slugging percentage, strikes out a ton. I think he has the worst strikeout rate on the team, which I thought he had a pretty bad strikeout rate compared to like Schwarber or Baez that are like more known to strike out a ton. But he actually has a worse strikeout rate, which is, I guess, not too surprising. He's a rookie. He hits for power. But I think without Ian Happ early on the season, I'm not sure where the team would be. I mean, I can't really remember any other guys having really good starts besides him.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, the Cubs called up Happ. I think Bryant was banged up and Zobrist was hurt and maybe Russell too. So they kind of just brought him up and he was kind of like, oh, he'll be here for a few days and we'll see how he does. He homered in his first game. Like Hunter said, he got off to a really hot start. I think that strikeout rate will come down a bit as he gains more experience, kind of as we've seen with Chris Bryant. And yeah, and it's kind of amazing to me, honestly, to see Ian Happ with just all these other top prospects that the Cubs have had, hitting prospects come up, Bryant, Russell, Baez. It's just amazing to see how many have them panned out. You always hear, oh, if one of them turns out good, we'll be lucky. And really, maybe you could say Jorge Soler didn't really work out. Wilson Contreras in that boat as well. Just how many of these guys have worked out. And I'm excited to see what Ian Happ becomes in the future.
I'm really glad we didn't trade him. On that note, too, it just really surprises me that how much of an impact all these guys have had right away as well. Maybe not so much Baez. I remember it took him a little bit more time, but Contreras home run like his first day. Ian Happ just big first month. Kyle Schwarber, huge first month when he came back or when he first got into the big league. So yeah, it's really cool to see all these rookies just performing like they've been in the league for a couple of years. I think that's what we don't have the Corey Pattersons, the Felix Pies anymore. This is just, it's a different era of Cubs baseball.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it is interesting to see, as we're watching this game and Javi Baez just lined a single off the wall, how they handled Baez compared to the other rookies. Yeah, I mean, they brought him along slowly, and I think it was 2 years ago, he started the year in AAA. Or maybe that was 3 years ago. I can't remember. But yeah, all these other guys, though, they just kind of throw them into the fire, and it's really amazing. It's amazing to see how well they've performed. I mean, obviously we saw Kyle Schwarber kind of come back to earth a little bit this year, but yeah, it's really been so much fun to watch.
Yeah, Baez in particular this year, because Russell, he has been in and out of the lineup a ton this year. I mean, there was like off the field troubles that were rumored of, that's why he was out for a while, but then he had an injury. So it's just, I don't know if you can really pinpoint of when his injury became, but like Baez is like, yeah, he was the starting shortstop for the majority of the season. That's what we can really say. He definitely performed as most of the Cub hitters better in the second half, but still on the terms of the first half. So the Cubs went 43 and 45. The run differential was actually at 0. Not a lot of good memories from the first half I can think of. I was trying to think of series or games that were kind of like standout games that really personified the first half. And to me, it was that Yankees series where they got swept by the Yankees. There was that game where I can't remember if it went to like the 15th inning or whatever. I tried staying up. I remember I was in Colorado at the time. And to me, it was like, the Cubs, they would have won this game, and they just couldn't pull it out. I mean, obviously the Yankees were a good team, but I'm just like, we should have won like one or two of those games, I felt. I had some doubt in this team a little bit. I mean, I'm like, no way we have not seen the last of these Cubs, because as we'll talk about, Joe Madden has always been, he's shown his results in the second half, but I was still a little worried, mainly from that Yankees series. I don't know why it was that particular series that we got swept, but it's just like I thought we would bring it more. Same thing with the Boston series. I thought we played pretty bad with that series as well.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that 15 inning Yankee game. I was at that game, sitting in the bleachers. It couldn't hit all night, and then Chapman comes in for the Yankees and blows the save. The Cubs come back, tie the game, but then just couldn't get it done in extra innings. But I think everyone was kind of just like they'll come around, they'll come around. Eventually, people started getting a little worried. Probably not warranted, but yeah, I think around that time when they got swept, people were starting to wonder what was going on here.
I guess the main thing too, to make matters worse, is the comments from Miguel Montero. I've always felt this team was like pretty like well put together, like in the clubhouse. So we've had the Russell like rumblings about his outside baseball troubles, and then we have Miguel Montero, who you said like, well, we knew his comments from the World Series didn't fly very well. We knew this is kind of what we were getting into. At least that's what you said in his past with Arizona. And to me, that was like, oh, wow, are we going to see a meltdown from this team? Because honestly, as a Cubs fan, like last year, I thought the 2016 was going to be like the 2004 Cubs. I thought we were just going to like have some bad injuries. One guy is just going to go off on the team mentally or something like that. And so I was starting to think like, wow, is this the 2004 year that I was kind of expecting? So why don't you go over like what happened at the Miguel Montero situation?
So it was after a Jake Arrieta start, and I think he gave up something like 6 or 7 stolen bases. And after the game, Miguel Montero was saying Arrieta wasn't holding on runners. It's just kind of a thing that you shouldn't be saying to the media. Like you said, there were things that Montero said after. I think it was possibly the day of the World Series parade. He was complaining about playing time in the World Series, which I don't think sat very well with Theo and Jed. So I think this, when he called out Arrieta in the media, I think that was kind of the last straw. But what you said, being worried about like a meltdown, I think it really kind of was a big turning point in the season, because getting rid of, when they got rid of Montero, and that just let Contreras kind of step forward even more. From that point on, he was unbelievable.
I'm so biased against Montero because I kind of have he's one of my pet likes on the team, because I always liked him from the 2015. He got the hashtag "We Are Good" started. I always thought he was like a good fit for the team. Unfortunately, he just had a bad year in 2016, so people kind of turned on him. Although he had a turnaround year this year. I thought he played pretty well offensively. His defensive numbers, obviously, we were kind of bummed about. But you're right. I mean, I think this is what needed kind of to happen. No distractions. Let Contreras play. Let him blossom into the player that he came. We'll talk about in a second that he just had ridiculous second half numbers, particularly his August. So, but that's what the first half was. So the Chicago Cubs, they were hovering around second, third place. So the Cubs were definitely not out of it, because Brewers were not running away from it. And same thing with the Cardinals. So there was definitely plenty of time. So that's why we were not too worried about the team just losing it. And plus, the Cubs made a huge move. I think it was right at the All-Star break as well. So do you want to go over who we got at the All-Star break then?
This came as a huge surprise on a couple levels. Like you said, I think it did come during the All-Star break, which is a couple weeks, I believe, before the trade deadline. So, people weren't really looking for a big trade at this point, but the Cubs pulled a trigger, got Jose Quintana from the White Sox. And so, I mean, making a huge trade like this with the White Sox in and of itself was really surprising. There had always been rumors that, the White Sox wouldn't make a deal with the Cubs, which, that was probably pretty silly. But yeah, this was just a huge trade. The Cubs had to give up a really high prospect in Eloy Jimenez, outfielder. He could be an amazing player in years to come, but I love this trade for Jose Quintana. I think he's been one of the most underrated pitchers in baseball, because I think a lot of people kind of overvalue his win-loss records. He's a 500 pitcher, or he just wasn't getting run support. with the White Sox and didn't have a lot of wins, but and he's not flashy. He doesn't throw 98 miles an hour, but he strikes a lot of guys out. He strikes out more than a guy an inning, and he keeps you in games. He's unflappable. So many times you see him maybe load the bases in the first inning and escape with only giving up a run, and then he'll come out and shut you down for 5 more innings. And I'm just such a huge fan of Quintana, and the fact that the Cubs have him for another 3 years is just great.
Yeah, so the big concern with Quintana too, because he had kind of a down year. I think that was the criticism when we were hearing about possible trades, because other than Quintana, there was very, very, very few options for the Cubs of getting another starter. I heard Archer was like a possibility, but it was very unlikely that we were going to get him. The Cubs would have to give up position players and things like that. So that was probably the other best part about the trade. We just didn't have to give up Pap. We didn't have to give up Baez or anybody like that. So the Cubs are definitely looking better, because at the trade deadline, or when we got Quintana, the Cubs were 2 games under 500, and it's just something that I was not expecting to see. So we were a little worried here in Chicago, but the Cubs came out of the gate on fire. It was 14-3 surge to start the second half, and the Cubs get first place over the Brewers. But immediately after that, the Cubs go 3-7, while the Cardinals won 8 games in a row, tied for first. The Cubs made another trade, though. We got Alex Avila and Wilson. Talked about that trade a little bit, because I guess we didn't need a backup catcher, but we probably felt a little safer because we had, I can't remember who the other backup catcher is, but we needed, probably just for that depth reason, when Contreras needs a day off. Obviously, Contreras got hurt in August or late July, and he was out for about a month. So we needed somebody, and Avila was turned out to be a good fit from the Tigers.
Yeah, it did. Theo and Jed made it pretty clear that they were going to get a backup catcher. Alex Avila was having a good year in Detroit. He was hitting really well against righties, I believe. So he would make a nice complement to Contreras, but and then, like you said, Contreras ends up getting hurt. So it ended up being a nice piece. Justin Wilson, however, has been pretty much a disaster. He has 19 walks in 16 innings with the Cubs. He just can't seem to get the ball over the plate, which is kind of surprising. Because he was demonstrating very good control for the Tigers this year. So it says to me it's probably a mental thing, but to me he can't be trusted at this point for me in the playoffs. I don't know if he's going to make the playoff roster. So this trade was definitely, the Wilson part was kind of disappointing to me. Cubs gave up Candelario. He's a pretty good hitter, but just didn't really have any spot on this Cubs team. I don't know. I guess to me, if Wilson if he can't pitch in the playoffs, it's kind of a busted trade to me.
Which isn't too bad, because I think most of the deals that Theo has made for the Cubs, they've panned out pretty well. Montgomery, awesome trade. Chapman, some people can agree or disagree to that, but we needed Chapman for the playoff run. Trying to think of other ones, but obviously Soler and Wade Davis has been great.
Absolutely. The track record has been outstanding. Obviously the Arrieta and Strop trade for Feldman. There are definitely so many more positives that came out than a Justin Wilson for an infielder that really had no room on this Cubs team. So yeah, it was a little bit of a bust, but you got to take chances sometimes, and sometimes they don't work out. But they did get Avila, so it wasn't a total loss.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to think about Avila, because we were all worried that how can we fit the shoes of Wilson Contreras, because he had monster numbers in, I think it was July or August. I think I have it written down here. He was on fire during July. He has 321, 7 home runs, 19 RBIs, 27 hits, and 84 at bats. So numbers that I was not expecting to see. I knew the ceiling was high for this guy, but he fit into that cleanup spot really well at that point. So I'm really excited to see his identity just kind of keep growing. And man, I just didn't think we were going to get this good of a player last year. I thought he was going to be maybe a little bit too wiry, and he wasn't going to be able to control it, but the opposite. He's come up huge, whether it's the playoffs from last year or this year. Really starting the team off really, really great in the second half. I mean, the Cubs continue that though in August. I mean, Bryant and Rizzo had their biggest months in August as well. And Avila really fit in well, had some key RBIs, and that's like pretty much what we needed for. You can look at Bryant and Rizzo's numbers. August, Bryant's numbers 343 average, 5 home runs, 14 RBIs. Rizzo hitting 355, 7 home runs, 30 RBIs, 39 hits. I'm not even talking about like walks, all the on base percentage stuff that they had. Just really impressive stuff. Looking back on it, I thought, again, this is what the 2016 Cubs were going to look like. But instead, they hit right out of the gate, because most Cubs teams, they struggle out of the gate. Cold weather usually gets them. Wrigley Field, wind blowing in, kind of really gets them. Maybe there was a little bit of that this year, because I remember we made a lot of excuses. Oh, the weather was really bad here. I remember we had hail in Colorado. I was actually going to go to that game, but that game ended up getting canceled. So things like that, injuries, of course, played into part. But the Cubs really picked it up later than I guess we thought they would.
Yeah, I think I saw somewhere, I think this might have been before yesterday's game, that the run totals between this year's team and last year's team are basically identical. So you would think that the last year's team was a better offensive team, but in terms of runs scored, the Cubs are about just as good as last year, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, looking at the run differential in the second half, plus 129. I mean, that sounds like the 2016 Cubs. So standout series and games. Could you think of any more? Because you said you couldn't think of a first half, but what about the second half though?
For me, was it last week or so? The series against the Brewers. You had 3 extra inning games in a row. I think the Cubs winning the first 2, and then Wade Davis blowing his first save of the season, and the Cubs actually tying it, or no, taking another lead, and then they ended up losing it again. So that series, to me, with the Cubs winning 3 out of 4, I believe, that was my favorite series of the year. That was a lot of fun.
Same thing with me. I would probably put the Cardinals series right before that, where we swept the Cardinals. I would probably put that into discussion as well. I think what elevates those 2 series for me is the previous week they got swept by the Brewers. We weren't concerned that much because the Cubs pretty much after August had been in first place. But Cubs fans knew that if we get swept again by the Brewers, things can get a little dicey. And this is September baseball here, which made everything's more fun. September games, Cubs fans didn't get to experience that last year. So it was really a lot of fun to experience some fun September games. I got to go to the Milwaukee game where Quintana pitched the complete game shutout, which was a blast. I mean, it was really hot, but what a great series. I'll totally agree with you. And the Cubs just been outstanding in the month of September as well. So all the hitters have been playing great in the second half. Schwarber had a much more normal year. A lot of fans are like, oh, he's still not great. But, I mean, this is much more, I think, what we're going to see from Schwarber, hitting 250, hitting home runs, that type of thing. I mean, he's going to strike out still, because I don't think fans remember the second half of 2015. I'm talking about, like, he came up really hot, hit ridiculously for like 2 months, but maybe the last month of the season, this is kind of what he was doing. He was hitting, when he would get hits, they would be home runs generally. Other than that, he would like strike out a bunch. Schwarber's just coming back to earth. I'm hoping he gets a little bit more playing time during the playoff roster. We'll talk about that a little bit once we wrap up the season.
With Schwarber, it's funny just to see, how he was having such a down year, but you look at it now, and he hit his 30th home run yesterday. So, I mean, it's pretty incredible. But I think the Cubs are kind of figuring out where to use him. He's not, especially because of his defensive abilities or non-abilities, he might not be that everyday player. So I think they're starting to figure out where to use him a little bit better. So I agree. I think it'll be interesting to see how much they use him in the playoffs.
Yeah, and that reminds me too, the thing about this team that's really, I was trying to find the stat on this, but how many players did we have hit 20 home runs? I mean, it's Baez, Happ, Bryant, Rizzo, Schwarber, and Contreras. So that's 7 players. That's huge. That's something that usually the Cubs have. The Sammy Sosa, they have like 1 or 2 guys that hit a bunch of home runs, and then the rest of the guys, it's 10 or whatever. Just the whole lineup's been very consistent. I mean, if Russell was not hurt most of the year, who knows if he could easily have 20. And I think that's probably another standout moment too when Addison Russell comes back. I was a little worried. I'm like, this is another guy that the Cubs have that he can be pretty streaky when it comes to hitting, but he was a huge part in 2016, having a ton of RBIs. This year, when he came back, hit a home run in his comeback at bat against the Cardinals. Like, I thought it was probably my favorite moment from the season, just because he's had such a tough year. We just love what he does, and obviously on the defensive end, but he comes up with such huge hits, and a lot of that is kind of forgotten at times because he's more renowned as a defensive player. So the Cubs, they can either finish up with 92 or 93 wins, which is pretty impressive. Not as monstrous as our previous 2 years because we had 103 in 2016. Cubs had 97 in 2015. But it's still a pretty good season as far as when you look at a lot of their past playoff appearances. So overall, really, really fun season just because we've had a lot of downs, but we've had some ups. Were there any particular either players, moments, or anything like that? Was there something that you'll always remember, or is there a particular player that overachieved more than you thought, or was there somebody that disappointed you a lot this year?
In terms of a pleasant surprise, I touched on it a little bit earlier. For me, it has been Wilson Contreras. I never expected him to hit this well. He has 21 homers. He's got an 850 OPS. He has a shutdown arm. That was such a pleasant surprise for me. Wade Davis, even though I liked him coming to the Cubs, I have so much confidence in Wade Davis as a closer. I would feel better about Wade Davis coming into a game than I did last year with Chapman. I just feel like Wade Davis has ice in his veins. He's just the man. I hope they kind of stick to using him for one inning in the playoffs. I don't know how he'll handle playoff load that the Cubs used with Chapman last year, so that's something to keep an eye on. In terms of like a disappointment, I would probably have to go with Ben Zobrist. He had kind of a down year, but really with this team, with the amount of hitters they have, they can kind of afford to have a couple guys. Addison Russell had a bit of a down year too. He missed a lot of time, but he really struggled in the first half. But when you got a Chris Bryan and an Anthony Rizzo in the middle of your lineup, you can afford to have guys having some slumps here and there.
Yeah, I guess I was surprised with the Zobrist answer because he has performed definitely better in the second half, but overall, pretty down year. For me, unsung heroes, I definitely had Wade Davis, so same sentiments as you did. I actually have Mike Montgomery and Javi Baez for this one. So Montgomery, he was definitely an unsung hero for the playoffs. I mean, the game against San Francisco that the Cubs lost in extra innings, pitched like 3 or 4 innings. I think he's just been a great utility guy. He's pitched great in starts this year. Just reminds me of just he's our Travis Wood now almost. Just perfect. And I love having a guy like that that's very flexible, either in the rotation or in the bullpen. So love Mike Montgomery. I can't gush enough about him. Baez, I put him as just surprised just because his slugging was up more this year. I mean, I think he had a higher strikeout rate, so that's a little concerning, but it was just up by a little bit, and that's just how he's going to be. Like, he showed us something during the playoffs, but I thought maybe that was just a small sample size type of thing. But see him as another full season, his first real full season playing, he just really surprised me, and I'm so excited to see him play more.
I've found it very interesting to watch Javi Baez evolve over the years, because when he was in the minors, when he was the Cubs' top prospect, right when Theo and Jed took over, Baez came from the Hendry regime, but so he was pretty much the top prospect when Theo got here. Baez was a power guy. He was hitting 40 bombs in AAA. So that was exciting to know you had this guy. He can play second base and shortstop and hit 40 home runs. Now that he's up in the big leagues, he's not a 40 bomb guy, but he does so many. He's so exciting. The defense and the tags, and he's just so much fun to watch. So that, to me, I agree. He's been a nice surprise this year for me too. But I've really enjoyed watching him kind of become a major league player.
This just came to me too. I think what really excited me about Baez is just who's his personality. and that really came out in the playoffs. But this year, just even more. How much he shows emotion. Obviously, it's kind of like Contreras. Sometimes maybe it's too much, but just the way he enjoys the game, I love seeing that from him. So I can't wait to see more from Javi Baez. Disappointment though, John Lester though. I've always been a huge John Lester fan, and it's just weird to see him. He had a real down year this year. I thought in 2015 he got a bad rap for having the year he had. I thought he had an excellent year, but he just had like a few bad months in the start. But I thought he was awesome after that. People again, they look at the win-loss record. Same thing like with Quintana. So, but this year John Lester, like there was a lot of starts that just he got rocked early on. So I was a little afraid, but luckily the pitching staff, Arrieta had a great second half. Hopefully the hamstring or whatever is ailing him right now doesn't come into play. Hendricks, awesome second half as well. Quintana had like a rough patch there, but for the most part, pitched great as well. So as far as like history, when you look back at the season, I mean, pretty remarkable to think about. I mean, we have to enjoy it while it lasts. It was really cool also just to see how well we played in the second half, just because we were probably the best National League team in baseball for like a second half team. I think the Indians probably trumps the Cubs as far as like second half performance. But other than that, like, so what do you think about the Cubs as like when you look back at this year?
It's been a weird year. They got off to such a slow start. Now at game 162, they're kind of exactly where you thought they would be. That's pretty much one of the things that I love most about baseball is just there are so many games that usually you are what you are. So, but this was the plan. This was Theo's plan. Get into the playoffs every year. You're not going to win the World Series every year. It's just not going to happen. But the best you can do is get to the playoffs as many times as you can. Hope that everything goes your way in the playoffs like it did last year. So, yeah, I think it was a weird year. And at the same time, it ended up kind of being what we thought it would be. You know, I was thinking they would win the division again, but maybe not be as good as last year's team. And that's pretty much how it worked out.
Shout out to the Brewers for making it interesting too. Because going into the season, I was like, who's going to compete with the Cubs this year? So I'm actually glad that the Brewers kind of improved and kind of surprised most of the fans. And so I always like to see teams like the Brewers kind of succeed a little bit. Very exciting year. So quick prediction for the playoffs. Who do you got for your starters? How do you think the series with the Nationals is going to turn out?
I think it's going to be a tough series. The Nationals, they got a lot of really good players. I think, Max Scherzer left his start last night with a hamstring problem. I guess they did an MRI on it and just say it's a cramp, so that's definitely something to monitor. I think I saw that he is going to be starting game 1, but if that's something that gives him problems, that could be a huge advantage for the Cubs. In terms of starters, I'd go Hendricks at this point as my number 1 starter. He's, to me, the guy that I trust most in that rotation. Probably go Lester game 2, but if they wanted to go Quintana 2, I'd be okay with that as well. For me, the biggest question mark is the starting pitching. If the Cubs starters kind of play out how they can, I think they'll have a good shot. I mean, but if we have John Lester giving up 6 runs in the first inning, like we've seen a bunch of times this year, or if Arrieta struggles, he's a question mark for me too at this point, missing so much time lately. So if those guys struggle, to me, I think the Cubs are going to lose the series.
Yeah, I think this is the Cubs' probably hardest test for at least for a first round series as well. And this goes back to maybe even 2007. I think this is the best team that the Cubs is playing in the DS. And no disrespect either to all the teams that the Cubs have played. I mean, the Cardinals last year, the Giants, and going back to 2008-07, I don't think those teams had the powerhouse hitters and pitchers that this team has. So this is going to be a really, really interesting series. For me, I'd probably just go either Lester or Arrieta for game 1. Whoever didn't pitch game 1, pitch game 2. Probably Hendricks and then Quintana probably. Final question. We haven't actually talked about Lackey at all. Lackey actually ended up having like a pretty decent second half and pretty good season for like how old the guy is. Would you consider him at all for maybe a start or even the playoff roster?
Ooh, that's tough. Joe Madden has kind of said all throughout the year that he doesn't want to use Lackey out of the bullpen. For this series, it's only a 5-game series. I don't think they're going to take John Lackey on the roster. I don't know. I guess it's maybe either him or Justin Wilson at this point. I guess it's who do you trust more? And to me, I don't know if John Lackey has ever pitched out of the bullpen before, so that could be kind of a problem to me. I don't think they're going to take him in the division series.
Yeah, I don't think so either. People were throwing that idea around. I thought it was just kind of interesting because maybe just bringing up Aria's health as well. That I could maybe see it, but I mean, Joe Maddon, he's going to make the right decisions. I think he's really good when he's picking starters for games like this. So can't wait for this series. I'm hoping it doesn't get swept either way. I'm actually kind of hoping this series kind of goes a little deep, so we have some really good baseball to look forward to. All right, man. This is that's it for 2017 Cubs. Anything else to say about this team?
No, I'm just excited for this series against the Nationals. I think like you said, this is probably the toughest opponent they've had in the division series. It's too bad that it'll be a 5-game series, but it should be a great series. I'm excited for all the National League playoff series. They should be really fun to watch. But yeah, I think it's almost a coin toss at this point. I don't know who's going to win.
All right, well, I think that's going to do it for this edition of the Playoff Years. Please send us any feedback for the show. My plan for now is to have this episode on YouTube for starters. Depending on the feedback and just how busy my schedule is, I'm hoping to get an RSS feed, nice logo, all that stuff, hopefully set up by the end of the playoffs, so the baseball playoffs. Brian, I guess I should ask you, anything you would like to hear specifically on this like kind of project? Do you want to hear about like certain teams? Do you want to hear just anything, the certain topics that you're more interested in hearing about?
I liked your idea of kind of getting the Cleveland fan perspective on this. Personally, I can't even imagine what it would have been like to have lost that Game 7 last year. Probably the best baseball game I've ever seen, but the Cubs also won. So I don't know how that would feel on the other side. I think that would be a good perspective to get.
Yeah, that's another reason why I kind of want them to do well, or at least have a deep playoff run as well, because it'd just be really cool to kind of chronicle their journey here. And Cleveland as a city too, they've gone through a lot as well. I think the blow would have been much worse if the Cavaliers didn't win the NBA championship. That's another episode I'm probably looking forward to most, because I knew a few Cleveland fans. So anybody that knows anybody from different cities that would be interested in a project like this, either hit us up personally, or again, the show's Twitter at Playoff Years or playoffyears@gmail.com. But I think that's going to wrap up the first episode of the Playoff Years. So thank you everybody for listening, and I want to say goodbye.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Yep. Go Cubs go, and fly the W.